few minutes late starting. We are recording it, so you've just been identified that it is being recorded. So welcome and enjoy being with us today. The reason we are calling this meeting now, specifically this week and not next week, next month, is that the new corporate governance code for the UK came out on Monday, and that hasn't changed a huge amount of things in our lives. But I think the last 3 months going through the consultation process by the FRC, getting the feedback from the various entities and collating that information took the journey of the corporate governance code in a slightly different direction to what they had originally envisaged, what we all expected. So I think they've had a very busy period repositioning the way the code was going to be. Obviously impacts all of us. There's some good content on the web showing us what has changed, what's not changed. We'll get some links out to you from the FRC after this webinar. You will also get the recording of this webinar. So you're not here to listen to me. I'm here to ask questions later. But to begin with, I'm going to hand over to David, who is, correct your title, but numero uno at the FRC for governance. So if anything, the person who's been in the hot seat for the last few weeks and months and a year plus, I think, it's been quite a long journey. So to all of us who are here, welcome. Thank you for being present. And I'm going to hand over to David and hear what has happened and where we go from here.
Well, thanks very much indeed for that introduction, Sharon. I suppose the first thing I should say is thank you very much to you and to the company for inviting me to become a freeman of the company. And I attended the ceremony yesterday, and some of you, I'm sure, will have been there. It's an honour to be invited. It's an honour to join, and thank you very much indeed. I've been dealing with corporate governance and stewardship issues now for over 20 years in my life as a civil servant, and also almost 10 years here at the FRC as Director of Corporate Governance and Stewardship. That comes to an end next week, I have to say. As I said, I'm planning the end of a long-term full-time employment. So you've just got in time to hear about the new corporate governance code. I'm not going to talk for too long. I'll talk for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so. Very, very happy to take any questions that anyone has. So I think it's probably better to do this by having just a little bit of context and background. The existing code before this new code, the January 2024 code, was the code from 2018. And we'd rather got into the habit in the FRC of changing the code every 2 years, which is helpful in a way. It shows leadership, and also it means that we're looking at the market, what's happening in the market. It can also be, quite frankly, a little bit irritating for companies and investors to have the code continually changing in that way. So in 2018, we took a rather radical approach, and we substantially changed the code. The code over the years, I mean, you wouldn't imagine the number of requests we get to add something here, add some wording there, a new principle here, provision there to the code. Most of them are to do with can you report on X, can you report on Y? That's not how the code works best. The code works best when it's actually asking, generally speaking, the board of directors to actually do something, not to report on something, although reporting is important, to actually do something, because as you all know, the code is based on comply or explain. And I'll come on to that in a minute because we've made a change there. So do this. Hold yourself to this particular standard, and if you don't hold yourself to that standard and you think that another one is appropriate for your company in its particular circumstances, then do something else. But do explain well about why you've done it. So we stripped out a lot of the reporting requirements in the last code. And it became sort of leaner and cleaner and meaner, more principles based. And it meant that we didn't have to change it for 5 years until now. I'm quite proud of that. I'm quite proud of the fact that it's stood the test of time. People think that it works well. It sets a high standard. People think that it works well. But you can't not change it forever. And there have been various things that have happened over the past 5 years that have led to the changes today. And we're open with the fact that these changes are quite limited, because we do think the code is a quality document, which is well followed by UK premium listed companies. The quality of reporting on it, particularly where there are explanations made, is improving, albeit slightly slowly, but it's nevertheless improving. And there are particular areas we looked at, and largely this arises from the government's white paper in 2022, which is all aligned with the progress of the FRC to becoming a different type of regulatory body, but also raising standards of corporate governance in particular areas. Now, the main focus of the change to this code this time around is around internal controls. And I'll be honest with you, internal controls are extremely important, but they're not necessarily the things that excite debate when it comes to corporate governance. It's a relief for some of us that we're not talking about remuneration, etc. But we are actually talking about internal controls, which largely has not been touched in the code for at least 15 years. And that's, that is significant, because what we've seen over those years where there have been significant corporate failings, internal controls have been an important element in that, and that's why we were asked to change it. Now, the government decided in the white paper in 2022 that they were not, when it came to internal controls, and don't worry, I'm not going to talk all about internal controls for the next 10 minutes. We will mention some of the other changes, but it is the most important change. The government decided that they were not going to take a regulatory approach to this. They, of course, take a regulatory approach in the US with the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, where the directors have to make a declaration. That's what the government wanted, but they didn't want to do that through a legislative route. What they tasked the FRC with was to devise a principles, a code-based structure for reporting on internal controls in a flexible way, but that which did incorporate a director's declaration. Because if you look at the current UK corporate governance code, which I'm sorry I don't have quite that in front of me at the minute, if you look at the current code, since provision 29, what it says is that the boards need to review their internal controls, and they need to report on that. And that's about as far as it goes. It doesn't include a board declaration. And that's the, just bring this to the fore. That is the main change which has taken place with this 2024 corporate governance code. So if we turn to, I should at this point say that there is plenty of material on the FRC website. There's the UK Corporate Governance Code Mythbuster. There is a information table on the changes, the main changes that have been made. There's a feedback statement, which is everything we learned from the consultation, which is one of the biggest that we've ever done. And it was a proper open public consultation. We listened intently to what we were told. There's a feedback statement there. And there's another paper on exactly a little bit more detail on the changes and why. So all that information is available to you on the website. I'm just going to focus on a couple of areas. So if you look at what section 4 of the new code says now, we're looking again here at provision 29. And I'm going to read some about, make no apology for reading just a little bit about, because it's quite important. Again, it repeats the fact that the board should monitor the company's risk management and internal control framework, and at least annually carry out a review of its effectiveness. It then repeats what the original, the last code said, and people tend to forget this because they think we're doing something new in terms of the coverage of controls. It then says the monitoring and review should cover all material controls, including financial, operational, reporting, and compliance controls. And then it goes on to say what the board needs to do in the annual report. So that's really important because people think that something new has happened here. We're just restating exactly what the previous code said: all material controls, financial, operational, reporting, and compliance. It's really important that we get that message across because there's a view that this should really just cover financial controls. But as we all know, the code is flexible and boards need to actually make a decision about the materiality of risk and internal controls that is relevant to the particular circumstances of their company, and that covers. Of course, it depends your stage of growth. It depends what sector you're in, and of course, your financial controls very largely are going to be your most important controls. But operational and reporting and compliance controls are extremely important too, and will vary depending on the situation of your company. It then goes on to describe what this report should say, what it should in the annual report. The fact that it's been monitored and reviewed, very important. The second bit is the most important. A declaration of the effectiveness of the material controls as at the balance sheet date. Now, one of the things we covered in the consultation was, the extent of the review of the controls, whether it should be throughout the year. But no, we decided on the basis of the consultation responses that we'd home in on the balance sheet date, and the declaration that the board makes should be related to that. And then finally, again, I'll read this out: the description of any material controls which have not operated effectively as of the balance sheet date, the action taken or proposed to improve them, and any action that has been taken to address previously reported issues. That's really important too, because it's a declaration which the board has to stand by based on the action that they've taken to address any issues that they found as at the balance sheet date. So it's quite specific, and it's quite a change rather than the sort of slightly vaguer approach in the 2018 code. It's a very specific approach, but again, it's based on comply or explain. Now, we'd realise, now I have to say there's a lot of excellent reporting that goes on in this area already. And this is referred to, as you all probably know, we do an annual review of the quality of corporate governance reporting. And we did focus on this in the report that we put out in either October or November last year. There's a lot of excellent reporting that already goes on. But because of the fact that the nature of the declaration that the board have to make now on internal controls, we've decided to delay the implementation of that until the 1st of January 2026. All the other changes that we've made in the code will have effectiveness date of the 1st of January 2025. So there's a long leading time anyway for the whole code, so that companies can put all the right processes and practices in place in order to be able to report on the code in the following when their next financial year starts. But there's an extra bit of leeway given there for that particular provision 29 on internal controls, because of the nature of the board's declaration. I hope I've explained that adequately, and I'm happy to take any questions. If there's any more detailed questions that I can't answer, I will refer them into the team at the time that's available for me, or we can get back to you. The other thing I want to talk about, if I may, is the nature of comply or explain. I've already talked about this, and we have done our own research on this, and we've put out papers on this again that are available on the website. It's an accusation that's been made of the code since I suppose it was born back in 1992 or 3 with the publication of the Cadbury Code, which some of you may remember. That actually, yes, well, it says it's comply or explain, but we all know that it's comply or else. And this comply or else accusation, I'm not saying it has no validity to it whatsoever, but it's interesting to think about the forces that drive comply or else, because we're very proud of the fact that in the UK, I often point this out, there is a lot of corporate governance in the legislation, in company law. There's a lot of corporate governance in the regulations that fall out of that legislation. For example, look at shareholder rights, look at the accountability and reporting on directors' remuneration, for example. A lot of it in the law already. The code is the part where you can't write down regulations for how boards are going to govern their companies. Well, you could try and write them down, but never actually get to the heart of an issue in an individual company. And that's really, 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 this is the flexible bit. So the accusation that actually it's a set of rules and people follow a set of rules. And I understand why people think that they should follow a set of rules. And in a sense, that makes life a bit easier if you can tick a box. But it's not comply or else. It is comply or explain. And many companies take advantage of this. We have been pushing on this score for a number of years. That has actually resulted in a new principle beginning of the Corporate Governance Code now. And I'm looking now at Principle C, I believe it is. That, no, that's not right. That is, I'll just read it. I'll just read it out to you. Yes, it is Principle C. Governance reporting should focus on board decisions and their outcomes in the context of the company's strategy and objectives. Where the board reports on departures from the code's provisions, it should provide a clear explanation. Now, we're very clear that when it comes to comply or explain, a good explanation explains a departure from the code. And that when you're doing that as a board, you need to think about what outcome you want. The outcome you want is a high standard of governance. And what you're saying is that high standard of governance will not be achieved through the expectation of a code's provision. It needs to be done in a different way. And that is entirely acceptable. And that's why we've introduced that new principle, Principle C, because it's actually making that plain in the body of the code. It's saying that the flexibility is there. And if you need help with actually delivering on that flexibility and using that flexibility, think about what your departure is. Think about what outcome you want to achieve. Hopefully, that focuses reporting on, it makes it clearer, it makes it more precise, it makes it focused on outcomes. And what we don't want to see, if I'm being frank, is long explanations that focus on sort of policy or process. I mean, sometimes the process, I say, is important, but long explanations focus on policy. What you're saying, this is what we want is, this is what we're trying to achieve. And some of the best explanations that we get already follow that line of thinking. And you will see some of those as well in the report that we put out in October or November last year. So there we are. I mean, those are the two main changes that we made. I could go through more. There are some small changes to remuneration where we've actually removed some of the reporting expectations because they're already in the law. We've clarified what we want companies to say about malice and clawback, the work of the Remuneration Committee, malice and clawback, and when that's been used over the reporting period. And I think that is helpful. And I suppose the other one area where we have made a change is with our references to diversity and inclusion in the code. We've always been very keen to avoid a sort of tick box list of diversity. Diversity is extremely important. Diversity of thought, diversity of approach, and we've seen, unfortunately, too often where groupthink takes hold and the consequences of that. So diversity, extremely important, but we didn't want a list of diverse characteristics because it gets a bit tick boxy. So if you look at the way we've approached diversity in the new code, it's much broader. We say appointments and succession plans. This is Principle J, new principle. Both appointments and succession plans should be based on merit and objective criteria. They should promote diversity, inclusion, and equal opportunity. Very simple, straightforward language, which emphasizes the importance of diversity and inclusion, but doesn't encourage a tick box approach. So there we are. As I said, all the information that you need is on the website. There are certain things that we didn't do because, largely speaking, the consultation responses said that they wouldn't be helpful. We are also very alert to the government's growth and competitiveness agenda. I actually think, this is a personal view, would say there's necessarily this is my personal view, that there are those who sort of pit corporate governance and stewardship on one side of the house, and then growth and competitiveness on the other, and that they're somehow in competition. This is not the case. They are mutual and they support one another, and I don't think we should forget that. So the intention behind all of these changes has been to support the growth and competitiveness agenda with measured changes to the code that improve the quality of governance and also sustain growth and competitiveness. And I think we also have to remember that the code, whilst it applies to all our premium listed companies, of which there are 400 or 500, it is there's a great deal of variety in that 400 or 500, and that's what the code is trying to cope with. So I'm going to stop there, if that's okay, and happy to take any questions that you have.
Now, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Perfect.
Yeah,
sorry,
I can
guys.
hear you. Yeah.
Operating on a phone, balancing on a steering wheel, not my best choice of location whatsoever. So, Anne, I'll come to you in a moment. David, from your perspective, if you look at the feedback that came back in the consultation, what was the most critical pushback that business gave on this? And was it their pushback that created the change, or the legislative change, or the two together?
Well, yeah, that question is to the point, Sharon, because as you know, there were certain things that we didn't do with the code because the government decided not to pursue some secondary legislation. Now, in relation to the code, this was in relation to what would have been a regulation for reporting on a resilience statement, an audit and assurance policy, and there were a couple of other areas, fraud and dividends, which were not entirely related to the code, but clearly on the resilience statement, that was the most important, and the audit and assurance policy, those did not go forward. So a lot of the changes that we were consulting on were related to those, and we've had to drop those. I think so that's that's a partial answer to your question. The other more direct answer to your question, where do we get the most pushback? I think the most pushback was there was a bit of a lack of understanding around what we were suggesting when it came to internal controls. I think there was an interpretation that we were asking for something completely new, which wasn't in the existing code. rather than understanding that what we wanted was a board declaration. And that is the issue that needs to challenge minds. I think people thought that we were asking that this ask for operational compliance and financial controls should possibly be limited to financial controls only. But if we'd done that, we would have taken a step back. What we're asking for is the board declaration. It's the board declaration that is not in the previous code, and it's there to concentrate minds, and it's there to make sure that the board have done their competent oversight and a full thought process about materiality of their risks and their internal controls. And that word materiality is important because the board can't say that's above my pay grade. There's no pay grade above. They are there to make those decisions, and it's not. So it's not for the FRC in individual cases to say, well, this is what materiality means to you in this particular case. It's for the board to decide. So I think there was a little bit of pushback there, but I'm clear that we've explained that. And if you look at the guidance, which is going to come out on Monday, some of you who are familiar with the guidance will know that there are about 3 or 4 bits of guidance that go with the code currently, and it's always been our intention to sort of collate and stream that guidance all down to one much slimmer volume. It's not there as an instruction manual to tell you how to do things. It is the G word. It is guidance. It's there to help. And in the guidance, and the guidance is not there to tell you what materiality is in each individual case, but to help with the board's assessment of what is material.
Fantastic. I have got a question from Anne, which I'll take in a moment, and I've got one from Anna Marie I'll take afterwards. Anybody else, if you want to put in questions, please, I can see it's in the group chat is one place. That's great. If not, if you could just raise a electronic hand, and I'll take questions in order then. But David, just one more question that I'd like to ask before I open it to Anne, is the diversity statement wasn't in the first version, came into the second version, specifically talking about gender, which really annoyed me no end. They fixed that in the 2018 code and listed about 8 different diversities. I notice now they've gone back to a generalism of relevant diversities. Can you give I think that's brilliant because being specific is not what the code is about. Tell us a bit about that journey of that change and where corporates are today in that diversity agenda.
Yeah, sure. I think there's a massive amount of progress that's been made. And to a certain extent, and I know this is actually, and I'm very happy with the progress that's been made, but certainly where you can measure things, you can make progress. So of course we've had the work of what was originally the Davis Committee, and then the Hampton-Alexander work, which is now FTSE Women on Board, FTSE Women Leaders on Boards, I think it's called now. And that's all been based on voluntary initiatives to get 30% and more gender women on boards, and that's been successful. Then we have the work of the Parker Review, which is on ethnicity on boards, which again where targets have been met. So it's always been a voluntary approach, and then when you can actually measure. You can actually measure things, and you can see the progress that's been made. I mean, what as I some of what I said in my little talk there was to do with the fact that to acknowledge that progress has been made, but acknowledge that diversity should be looked at in the round, and that's its diversity of approach. I think the phrase that we used in the existing code was cognitive strengths. But the purpose of this is to get around groupthink, to have different points of view, some of which can be delivered through gender or ethnic diversity, but some of which won't be. And that's why we have this broader language in the code, as I said, to think about diversity in that way, because the dangers of groupthink, I think, as I have said, are all too evident.
Thank you. In a conversation that we were having, not you and I, but another person yesterday, discussing the declaration now by the board. If you go back and we put our risk management hats on for a moment, you talk about your first line of defense, modern language assurance, second line of assurance, third line of assurance. Typically, we talk about the fourth line of assurance being the external, your auditors, regulators, those kind of things. Have we effectively made the board one of those assurance levels, 4 or 5?
I don't think we've changed that. What I think we've done is make sure that the board understands those different levels of defence. I don't think the board has become that. I think because in a sense they're already in there and they're already doing it.
They're there, number 3 in a way.
But maybe they haven't been as this is why the changes have been brought. Maybe they haven't been as effective as they should have been, and there are unfortunately examples of that.
I agree.
So I don't think we've added them in. I think they're already in the mix there, and I think we've made the purpose of what they do and the effectiveness of what they do. We've highlighted that by giving them this declaration. And it's a strengthening across the board. It's a strengthening across the board of the company, of the importance to the company of these internal controls. Of course, the importance to that leads on to their relationship with their shareholders and the wider stakeholders.
Yeah, and it does create accountability. Okay, I'm going to drop my questions for a moment. I'm going to take Anne, then Anna Marie, and then any electronic hands I see after that. Anne Punter.
Hello, thank you so much, David, for such a really clear review, which made making notes of key points really easy. I wanted to ask you, in the context of the key thing that you've emphasised about monitoring risk management over all material controls, is there anything about the non-executive directors in all of this?
Well, yes. I mean, I suppose the straightforward answer to that question is that, of course, the audit committee, for example, should be formed of independent non-executive directors. And we also say that one of them should have all the financial experience and, possibly have a professional qualification. So the monitoring, if you catch me on another talk that I do, I'll talk about the role of the independent non-executive, which of course is to do with strategic thinking and do with particular expertise that is relevant to the company, but also for the independent non-executive is what I call the monitoring or the policing role as well. And those and their job is to assure, in as far as they can, that the executive element of the board and at the just below board level, the executive level of leading level of the company is alert to the importance of risk management and effective internal controls. So yes, and then there's a board declaration, and everyone has to sign up to that board declaration, and that includes non-executive directors. They are crucial when it comes to this issue, it's as I said in the answer to the last one, it's a reinforcement of what should be taking place already. I think I suppose the other thing I would say at this point is when we talk about internal controls and we talk about risk, it always has, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, there's always that sort of negative element to it as well. That risk is always downside, and then it's the risk, you need to think about risk all the time, and it's it's a sort of negative issue. The point is we also need to think about opportunities as well. And one of the issues that is raised in governance, particularly over the past 6 months, is that we've always seen that risk has been focused on to the extent that they're actually ignoring entrepreneurial opportunity as well. Everything has a risk. You just need to know. You need to know what those risks are. And you need to know what they're taking, and this is all part of that. But it shouldn't. So it shouldn't necessarily be seen as closing down opportunity.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that, and thank you, Anne. Anna-Marie, and then if there are electronic hands up, say yes to me. There are, because I can't see them, but I do see there are questions coming up in the chat as well. But Anna-Marie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so thank you again, David. It's much appreciated. Thank you for your time this morning. It's going back to the material controls and the declaration. So I think there are going to be a lot of non-executive directors who aren't very happy with this and will use this as leverage to try and increase their remuneration, because every time we ask them to do something which involves them actually signing off on something, then they seem to think that that should be the case. I think one of the things that interests me is that you actually went into the fact this should be done at balance sheet date rather than throughout the year. And I'm taking
I beg your pardon. I didn't hear that the end of that last sentence. I just wanted to.
So yes, so the declaration should be made that the material controls are sufficient, or sorry, that the internal controls of material risks are sufficient as at the balance sheet date.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about the last audit committee before the accounts are signed, which is already the longest audit committee of your life. It goes on forever, and there's no way that I can see a non-executive board signing a declaration that material controls are adequate as at a certain date if they don't look at all of those controls on that date. And it's already always a very, very thick agenda. So I think when you look at how this sort of falls down into the organisation, so say compliance controls, you can't go through all of the compliance controls, financial controls, operational risk controls, market risk controls on the day when you're also doing a page turn of, say, an annual report and accounts. So I think really the way boards are going to have to look at this is to establish what are their materiality margins and what they are for compliance when they do the compliance controls, which might be 6 months before the balance sheet date, and then have to look at all of the material controls on that day, because that's actually quite a large responsibility to put on the board at a time of year when they're already very, very busy. So I think that if that's applied with the intent behind it, that's actually quite a considerable piece of work. So that was my first point. And secondly, I think if you look globally now, a lot of people are revising their corporate governance codes to include reference to ESG concerns. So for, I think, example, Australia are including sustainability. Hong Kong have proposed having a separate ESG report so that these things don't start to cross over into the corporate governance, keeping the corporate governance and the ESG very separate. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. Obviously, we've just had this one, but we might have another one in the future. But other jurisdictions are looking at having separate ESG reporting. Others are sort of tying it in with their corporate governance reporting. And I wondered if you could give us any insight into your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay, just to answer your first question, I think you're right to acknowledge the timing issue there. We're not trying to sort of force. There will be more work involved. There's no question about that. Particularly for companies who are not, who perhaps are not, as not dealing with this as effectively they should do at the minute. So there will be lead-in work that's required, and that's why we've the date for implementation is long for this. But on your specific thing about the balance sheet date itself, there is flexibility inbuilt in there, and some of this will be explained in the guidance. There's a flexibility. We're not expecting everything to be right up until the balance sheet date, because there are things that can happen throughout the year that you will need to deal with. And that those issues may not be resolved, and so we see this as a year-on-year process. So issues that have come up, can we call it this? Can we call it this the wrong time, i.e., right up until the balance sheet date when you're still dealing with issues that have come up will still need reporting, dealing with. You can't necessarily report on them at the time. You will need to report on them in the following year. So this is going to build up this will be dealt with on a sort of year-on-year basis. Do appreciate the sort of timing issues with making sure that absolutely everything is dealt with as at the balance sheet date, which clearly is almost a practical impossibility. On your second point, we did have a proposal in the consultation about making sure that the audit committee were looking effectively at ESG reporting, and we did withdraw that, but for two reasons. One is because there's so much work going on domestically and internationally about narrative and strategic reporting when it comes to E and S issues. I always tend to point out that the G is already there. The G's been there for years and years, and actually, in a sense, the G comes first, and that the E and the S feed into the G. And so we don't want to anticipate what may happen in terms of further narrative reporting requirements that might happen domestically and internationally. We didn't want to anticipate that. The second thing I would say is that, in a sense, ESG, the consideration, I won't say reporting here, but the consideration of ESG issues is already there in the code. It's already in provision. Is it 1 or 2? Let me just quickly check, where we make reference to the 172, section 172 statement, which boards have to make. Yeah, it's provision 5. We make reference to that. We don't want, and of course, what section 172 is, the infamous, part of the Companies Act, which says that the board owes its duty to the company as shareholders and the success of the company, respect of the shareholders. And then it lists, it's a non-exhaustive list, a set of factors which they have to take into account in order to deliver that duty. Those are not requirements, they are not duties within themselves. They are a set of factors which it is suggested may well be relevant to the board's consideration. And they include the environment, local communities, high standards of business conduct, etc., etc. So the E and the S are there. They're in section 172. We refer to it in the code, and the reason we refer to it in the code is because we want to. They are relevant to governance, and governance is about the decision making, and decision making involves the E and the S elements. And we would like to know the board's thinking on that. So in a sense, it's already there, and we didn't want to add to it because of any domestic and international developments that might take place this year.
Thank you very much, David. Appreciate that. I unfortunately cannot see the chat box from my phone. Can you see it, David, and see whether there's a relevant question?
Questions, and I can remember one of them. One of them was a forward-looking question about the next election. Perfect. And I suppose if we just make assumptions, you know that if the opposition, for example, is in government, and what might they want to do with the code? I think I don't think we're looking at. My assessment at this stage, and I suppose this has to be a personal view, doesn't it, is that we are not looking at major change to company law, pluralism and the rest of it. They may well want to look at the code. My assessment at this stage is that it won't be, whilst they regard these issues extremely important, there will be other priorities that they have to follow through on. They may well take an interest in the code, for example, where it comes to employee engagement. I don't think we're looking at issues. There will be silent elements who are interested in employees on the board and those sorts of things. It's already quite well provided for in the code. If you want employees on the board, the best thing to do, and you think that's a good idea, the best thing to do is to legislate for it. If you try and impose it through a code mechanism, it's not going to work. So I think there will be interest, and I think the E and the S will have more focus of attention. And the interesting thing is where the balance is going to be. Is it they're going to try and deliver it through a code mechanism, or are they going to try and deliver it through legislation and regulation? I think that's the interesting debate.
for company secretaries looking at the next year, 2 years, because you're going to have to start implementing some of these changes in year 3, implementing the next level, being that declaration. What advice would you be giving to company secretaries today to get there efficiently, effectively, and successfully? How would you advise a company secretary?
Sorry, is this across the board in terms of all of the code changes, or?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
code has changed.
A good company secretary is going to be alert the board to these changes as soon as they can. How can I put this? You don't want to alert a board in terms of in terms of sort of red flashing lights. That's not the answer. That's not the way to do it. It's the way to do it is to say that we need to make sure that our risk management and our internal control assessments are correct. And this is going to be given a little more focus because of the code. There's a long lead-in time for this, and a good company secretary will be alerting the board to that, and will also be, insofar as they have, and all companies are different, as far as they have jurisdiction over these issues, they will want to coordinate or be involved in the coordination of the different elements of the company who need to contribute to that, so that they can present effective and a coordinated approach to the board. So again, once again, the company secretary is the focus of all of this, because they are the conduit through which this information takes place. They are the link between the board and the rest of the company. So it's advising the board and mopping any brows where needed, and also making sure that the board have confidence that they're in charge, they're in control, and they're communicating well with the rest of the company.
I think from my perspective, I think a good program would be that of dissemination of information training, giving the board assurance that they've got time, actually looking into the business. As the company secretary usually has such a good balance of knowledge about what is going on in a company, and identifying gaps, areas of concern, and starting to focus the board on those and the elements of the business on those things, addressing policies and procedures and getting them really fit for purpose. And I think if I had to look at any one focus that this change in the code has brought, is the absolute criticality of independence of mind of your non-executive directors. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I include the chair in that one. The execs have to do that from their director hat role. They absolutely need to do that. But our risk will always exist. They think, oh, well, I'm the chairman, or I'm the CEO, I don't need to. And for me, the focus from a governance practitioner would be the importance of saying to people, this is where you absolutely have to vote your independence, your own thoughts, your own assessments. Because if every director at Carillion and all these equivalents had actually used their own brains and been brave enough to think them through, we might not have got to where we did. And what we recommend to people is the importance of having a forum regularly, religiously present to allow fears to be raised. So what we say to boards is, after a board meeting, stop, have a cup of coffee, then sit down again and say, without any of the observers or the extras, just the directors and the company secretary, what did we get right? What did we get wrong? What did we miss? How could we improve? Then the execs leave, and the non-execs have the same conversation. And then the chair leaves, and we have the same conversation. Or whatever else we want to, which provides a series of 3 10-minute meetings potentially, where if something is niggling, you have a safe environment as a non-exec to bring it up. And that, so that's what we recommend. to promote that independence of thinking, the independence of mind, that this code really does speak to. This one change really does speak to.
Mm-hmm. No, extremely good point. Extremely good point. I'm not sure how long we got left, but I did actually see the other question, which is about the FCA's consultation on the listing rules. So I'll just read it out. It says the FCA has consulted on the revising UK listing rules. Proposals will see the premium listing removed. Which companies will the 2024 corporate governance apply to, and when this happens, will all UK listed companies be in scope? The answer to that is yes. What the proposal is from the FCA is that we don't have a standard sector and a premium sector, that they are merged into one, that all of those companies will now apply the UK Corporate Governance Code. Now, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but I think the indication in the consultation document that there were only about 90 extra companies in a standard listing who would need to apply the corporate governance code, which they didn't have to do before. But the proposal also is there, and I haven't got the consultation document in front of me, I'm just doing this from memory. The proposal is that those companies would not need to apply the code immediately. They would be sort of grandfathered or grandmothered, and so they would be given time. But whether they would eventually have to apply it at all is a question, and I think that is being asked. But so it would only be new companies into the new single segment listings that would need to apply the code. Those who are already in the standard listing element have basically got a bit of an opt-out.
Thanks. We are running out of time. Gabriella, right. I can see you've got a hand up, so I'm aware my system does allow hands up to be visible to me.
Good.
So that's good.
I hope you can hear me, Sharon.
Yeah.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. I know you would like to have a say about the Worshipful Company, and maybe
I'd like to wrap this up
night.
Because as someone who worked in FTSE 100 companies for nearly 20 years, and I was there when Cadbury came in, so I'm terribly old and ancient. None of this is really new. In a sense, it's what we should have all been doing all along, and it's how you actually make it really stick. And David, thank you very much for your talk today. I'm sorry I was a bit late joining, but actually I know this is a good step forward, because I was very worried a while ago that we were just going to throw all this away. And I really hope we don't, because London as a city has always been at the head of corporate governance, even more so, I thought, than the SEC in America. But there you go. Anna Marie, you look so worried. I just thought, oh my God, are you just ticking boxes at audit time, where this should be embedded in what your company does all the time? When you're a company secretary with a board, you should be looking at this every board meeting.
Every day.
Every board meeting, you should be analysing it, which I have done over the years. And it isn't just something when the auditors come in to tick a few boxes. It is actually much more important than that. And I could tell you loads of stories about non-executives, independent non-executives having ructions with the chairman about things, and that's what they're there to do. The non-execs are there to challenge. And as a company secretary, you're in a very unique position to enable that, facilitate it, not get involved in any way, and hopefully not get killed in the crossfire.
But just be mindful of time, please.
It's such an important thing. Anyway, as we're on time, thank you all for coming today. This has been hosted by the Worshipful Company of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, and we were delighted yesterday that David was made a freeman of our company. So,
and I think there are a few more in the room from yesterday's
And
Freedom
if there are
Ceremony
a few more in the room, absolutely delighted for you. And I want to thank Sharon very much for organising this, and David for your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One last word I would like to just mention is in our court meeting yesterday, we have reviewed some of the conditions for our freedom level within the organization versus our livery level. And we have always been quite restrictive as to who in the governance sphere can become a member of the worshipful company. That has now been interpreted in a more relaxed governance professional manner rather than chartered secretary. So to join the freedom of the company, you do not have to be a chartered secretary any longer. If you want to become a liveryman, chartered secretary is a slam dunk. There are other conditions by which you can become a liveryman, not only through the chartered route. So we are open for business as a worshipful company. Please, those of you who are not members of us yet, drop us a line. We'll drop all of you a line as well, what it is the company is all about and governance is its. So I'd like to, with that note, thank everybody from the clerk's office, from all of you for attending. Absolutely magic to have you present. And David, it definitely shows the speaker brings the crowds. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. We'll see you out there in business. Enjoy your holiday, David.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.